I'm Stephen Wong, I'm a Master of Wine, and I cover New Zealand for the Real Review, so naturally I'm going to be talking about New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. In the record-setting crop of 2025, it comprised nearly 80% of the annual crush and nearly 90% of the exported wine volume. The vast majority of Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand comes from Marlborough, where 90% of the country's Sauvignon Blanc is planted. Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc made New Zealand wine famous with its classic herbaceous, crisp and aromatic style that made huge waves in the UK market. So this style has actually evolved over time. Now has associations with a more passion fruit driven, fruitier style. It still has those classic kind of methoxypyrazine, cut grass, capsicum, grassy notes. Also, I think you'll have encountered a few of the less favorable tasting notes like sweat and cat's pee. These are all part of the volatile sulfur compounds family, which Sauvignon Blanc exhibits, and passion fruit is part of that. You get the good with the bad, and it's all about managing those. These sulfur compounds, and specifically thiols, are actually partly a result of New Zealand's climate and also how they are made. It's also the signature of the most widely known style, but that's not the whole story, even if it is the vast majority of what is made and what is available in the market. Different regions actually make different styles, and even within Marlborough, you can have different styles of Sauvignon Blanc. Marlborough isn't even really the oldest or arguably the most traditional style of Sauvignon Blanc. The style, which we now know, actually was developed concurrently by a number of different people. One of the most famous ones would be classic Cloudy Bay style, which was created by Kevin Judd, who now is of Greywacke. Maybe one of the things you may have heard actually is that combination of ripe fruit and herbaceousness is a result of the way that the rows are planted in Marlborough. If you're kind of looking across whole swathes of vineyard as they're ripening, you'll see these bands of riper and less ripe, especially near harvest, because of course the floodplain of the Wairau, which runs through that heart of Marlborough wine district, would have created these undulating flood patterns and layers of more free draining gravel and a little bit more silt, perhaps even with touches of clay, outwash. They would undulate across the floodplain, and when you put rows straight through them, you'll actually have, even within the same row, different ripeness levels. So when everything gets picked by machine all in one go, you get this combination of ripe and less ripe. Now that's the classic theory, right? Let's kind of talk about what the different regions will bring you. Now, keep in mind, we are referring to a small proportion of the overall production, but that's the beauty in diversity. So Hawke's Bay, there'll be wines that you're very familiar with, like the classic blend built around Sauvignon Blanc that Te Mata makes called Cape Crest, clearly inspired by the blends that you get in Bordeaux, like white Bordeaux. So they will be oak aged. The coastal vineyards will actually give you this salinity and a slightly different acid structure. And as you head further inland, about Central Hawke's Bay, where the limestone starts really dominating the soil, you actually end up with very different structures. The acidity is a lot higher and the ripenesses are quite different. You get less of that tropical kind of ripeness. And there's also this emerging movement in Hawke's Bay of the next generation of winemakers, of producers who are experimenting ceramic eggs. You start to see amphoras being used, partial skin fermentation to build a little bit more texture into those wines. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Closer to home, we're going to be in the Wairarapa, particularly in Martinborough. For example, Martinborough Vineyard is always a standout. I recall that Steve Smith, Master of Wine, when he was in charge of Craggy Range, used to tell me that in the US anyway, it was the Martinborough Sauvignon Blanc from Craggy Range that was the big seller, and it wasn't their Marlborough wine. You also have wines which are long lees aged and they're a lot more savoury or even a little bit more smoky. So for example, Helen Masters at Atarangi actually built in a lot of complexity with different aging techniques and partial sort of skin fermentation. And these are wines that do develop and bottle quite slowly and provide interesting drinking over a larger number of years. Just over the Cook Strait, over to the South Island, of course, we enter the heartland of Sauvignon Blanc. Marlborough isn't really a monolith. I mean, you do get a lot of producers who make classic Sauvignon Blanc that will make a Marlborough blend. Sub-regionality really is a thing. Beyond the Wairau, the main Wairau Valley, you actually have the hills and the higher clay content vineyards of the southern valleys. And the southern valleys would be where, for instance, Clonry are, and a few of the other ones like Folium. And not only are they organic, they are also dry grown, which actually results in much lower yields. You wouldn't be finding the classic grassy, herbaceous, passion fruit kind of notes in those wines. They're going to be a little bit more savory. I find a lot more minerality in them. Now, the Awatere, which is the next region over, so that is slightly older soil. It's also further south. This is actually where you will find these classic kind of tomato leaf, tomato stalk characters, a very different kind of herbaceousness instead of the capsicum cut grass. When blends include a portion or a significant contribution from the Awatere, you'll see those characteristics. So if you cross the other way from Marlborough, you head northwest, you'll reach beautiful sunny Nelson. And Nelson has a style of Sauvignon Blanc, which I find is really beguiling. It often captures the mellow, sunny disposition of that region. They can sometimes be wines that are herbaceous, but they're a fresh, crisp herbaceousness that reminds me of jumping into a swimming hole or just standing by the side of the ocean when you're really warm and you just want to cool down and have a little jump in the surf. So speaking of continentality, we then arrive at the last region. So that's Central Otago. It is the only sort of true semi-continental climate that we have in New Zealand. You have extreme diurnal range from day to night, and there's a lot more schist in the soil. Central Otago Sauvignon Blanc is often less herbaceous, if ever herbaceous. The acidity is a hallmark, but it's a very different kind of acidity. Instead of this kind of zesty, crisp acidity, it tends to be a little bit more racy, a little bit more linear. Hopefully, I've convinced you that the landscape of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is not quite as straightforward as a lot of people believe. If you have a chance, have a look at some of these other styles of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc and see where your preferences lie. Happy drinking.